Hello and welcome to the Gaggle, where we challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Szamuely. With me today, of course, is co-founder of the Gaggle, Peter Lavelle, host also of RT's talk show Crosstalk. Well, the House of Representatives has passed, with a very narrow majority, because it only has a very narrow majority, something called For the People Act. It's better known as HR 1, which pretty much lifts all of the customary burdens that encumber elections in democracies to ensure security and vitiate any chance of electoral fraud. All of the various provisions in it, like automatic registration, same-day registration, various curbside voting, drop box voting, all of the various nonsensical things that marred, to say the least, the 2020 elections are all enshrined in this legislation. A quite remarkable thing. I mean, when you had an election that was a debacle, such as the one in November, the legislation that you should be putting forward is one, well, let's try and avoid these debacles so we don't get another thing like this, which leads people to violence and such rage that they think that they've basically the election has been stolen. So you want to say, okay, we don't want people getting angry and feeling that they were robbed, so we'll have election security. But no, the Democrats in the House of Representatives push forward with this. Again, no voter ID requirements or anything like that. Mail-in ballots, none of the security issues that we would require in mail-in ballots, they're all gone. So now, if this legislation is moved over to the Senate. Now, as our audience knows, it's a 50-50 tie in the Senate. And while Kamala Harris does have a casting vote, it's quite likely that the filibuster rule will apply, which means that they would require 60 votes to break the filibuster. The Democrats do have an option of going ahead and try to, the nuclear option, which is the basically try to do it like, with the 51 majority, the so-called, there's a particular term for it, which just escapes me, but they can get it through by
reconciliation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Yeah, the one that the COVID bill went through like that. Yes. And so anyway, they could go like that route. We don't know yet whether they're going to try that. But even if they did succeed, this would be rife for lawsuits because it is flagrantly unconstitutional. The Constitution is very specific. Elections are federal elections are decided by individual states. It is stated there, individual
enshrined.
States. Exactly.
It's enshrined.
Exactly. The manner of the choosing of the electors is up to the individual state and specifically the state legislatures. Not even state officials, state legislatures will decide the manner in which the electors are chosen. So even when the United States made changes to federal election law, such as giving the freed slaves the vote, such as giving 18-year-olds the vote, it had to be done via a constitutional amendment. There was no other way they could do it. It had to be done via constitutional amendment because it's enshrined in the Constitution that these issues are up to the states. So this piece of legislation, unlikely to get much further without serious lawsuits. However, it does present a marker, and it just continues this drumbeat led by the Democrats that unless you give us everything we want, unless you just basically throw out all the rules that govern elections in every civilized country, unless you do all of that, we would just keep screaming voter suppression, racism, racism. Peter, what's your take?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you touched on it because the founders were adamant that Congress keep your hands off state voting laws. Keep your hands off because it would be rife with potential fraud. And you pointed out perfectly in the beginning, everything that went wrong in November 2020, they want to make law.
That's right.
And if I have the number right, 20 attorneys generals are going to court. I mean, this is our responsibility. Let's be clear, everyone. What the Democrats in Congress want to do is something the founders were adamantly against, to federalize voting laws. Okay, that again, the federal government should have nothing to do with these things. There's a safeguard called the Constitution that keeps the government away from the states. See, unfortunately, history isn't taught well anymore. We have a federal republic. It's very, very important. It has its problems. And COVID's a good example when a national government could have standards and get the vaccine and the distribution. It's a lot easier. Russia is that way. From Vladivostok to Kaliningrad, it's all exactly the same thing. All right. And for a country of this size, it's probably a good idea. But the United States, its foundation is very, very different, unique, I would even say, in history. And so there are times it's a plus and sometimes it's a negative. The plus is voting. Okay, this is something that's very important. We saw time and again, numerous examples. We have evidence of this, that weeks before the 2020 election, states changed their laws. Sometimes it was attorney generals, sometimes it wasn't. At times it was the executive branch, which the Constitution says no, legislatures do this. This is what all those lawsuits were about. Unfortunately, in our opinion, here at the Gaggle, the courts dismissed it. Okay, I think they had some veracity. The court decided otherwise. Okay, they have the last word. Fine. But to go down this path right now, I mean, George, when you go buy a cup of coffee and there's a line, you wait your turn, right? Well, why can't we do that with elections? It worked for a long time.
Right.
Okay. And this whole thing about, voter ID is suppression, ridiculous. You need ID to open a bank account. You need ID to get on an airplane.
Exactly.
I mean, you every single day you need, and if it's, physical or electronic, like when I go to the post office here and I have to show ID, I have a picture on my phone and I say, this is me. Right. Yep, that looks like you. Okay, fine, that's fine. All right. Exactly. I mean, saying that this is exclusionary is ridiculous. Illegal aliens can get an ID from the DMV. Right. Okay, so what's the problem here? Right. And so you're saying all these people don't have bank accounts, and how to get a bank account if they didn't have ID?
Or even if they don't have a bank, I mean, they have to go to cash checking places. Cash checking places also ask for photo ID. They're not just going to give you here, well, here's a check, give me the cash. I mean, you have to show ID. You can't even get into a building. There's no, buildings don't allow you in, unless you can show ID. It is an absolutely nonsensical. And all of these other provisions, such as voter curing, which will be allowed. In other words, somebody tells you, when you said that you were voting for Trump, I think you probably meant you intended to vote for Biden. No? Yeah, I think so too.
Okay, let's go through some of the other ones here. I have a checklist here. It compels states to count mail-in votes that arrive up to 10 days after an election. That's right. After an election. Okay. What a cynic would say, that would allow people to say, how many more votes do I need? I'm sorry, but that comes to
anyone with any common sense would know exactly that, which was, of course, again, the issue that marred the 2020 election, which was that once they knew how big Trump's lead was with the in-person voting, they knew exactly how many votes that were needed in order.
Come on, George. That was just serendipity. All right, here's some. Compel states to allow ballot harvesting. So that means people go around, to nursing homes, to retirement communities. Give me all your ballots. Okay. That's a custody issue.
The custody issue. And again, we know all about the granny harvesting. People going around nursing homes and to elderly people. And tell them, yeah, of course, you meant to vote for this person, didn't you? Yeah. That's it.
One could make the argument this is not an anti-cemetery bill, okay? Right. These people, yes. I mean, if they were alive, we know how they would vote.
Right, but again, with the automatic registration means that people's names are just kept automatically on the voter registration rolls unless they're specifically removed. Well, that of course, allows for all of the kinds of abuses that we saw in November, when they were just sending out, ballots by the hundreds of thousands. I have no idea, whether these people were living in this address, whether they were alive or not. They were just sending them out, so people would receive 8 different ballots. I mean, so that's another thing, like what's called automatic registration. Yeah, in other words, unless you specifically go, please take me off the roll, your name is kept on. It means you can be registered in 2 or 3 different places.
I had a guest on Crosstalk. She said that she requested her ballot. She lives in a house where there are multiple other individuals. She said she requested a ballot in her name at her address. Everyone in her home got a ballot without requesting it, but she didn't get it when she requested it. Okay. All right. Let me hang on here. Let me refresh this here. There's a few others here. It's really extraordinary. Okay, we've already talked about banning voter ID laws. Compel states to allow bureaucrats to redraw congressional districts. Bureaucrats. This is not going to go through the democratic process. Compel states to allow felons to vote. Now, this is a really difficult one for me to get my head around. When you commit a felony, there is a penalty, and one of the penalties is that you're denied the right to participate in elections. I think that's because because the educational system is so deplorable. When I was growing up, I knew that if you commit a felony, you're not going to be able to vote for the rest of your life. That was common knowledge. We were taught these things. Okay.
Right. No, that's right.
Compel states to undermine free speech rights by imposing onerous legal and administrative burdens on candidates, civil groups, unions, nonprofits, and organizations. Okay. So they can actually determine who can be in the public square to participate in elections. Right. Where's that coming from?
Right. No, that's right. And of course, then you have those curbside voting. In other words, now that removes all of the restrictions that exist. And then you have the drop boxes. Well, you have these drop boxes when everyone knows where they are. I mean. The easiest thing is to literally stuff the ballot. I mean, you know where they are. You just stuff them, and then no, we need them. And of course, what was shocking in 2020 is that these drop boxes were disproportionately distributed. I mean, this was thanks to Mark Zuckerberg, who planted I think $300 million to ensure that these drop boxes were all located in heavily Democratic districts. So, but that again, that will become enshrined in law. It is an extraordinary thing. You cannot do this in any other country. Again, imagine if the Russian government put forward this legislation like this. It'd be screaming. I mean, the European Union would be screaming. United States would be screaming. Putin wants to be president for life.
Look, when over the past few parliamentary elections here, I have gone with friends to polling stations, and when I was with a friend, I was stopped each time because I'm not a Russian citizen, so I can't vote. And my friend would say he would like to see how it works here. Oh, okay, well that's fine. So go in and you give your passport. In Russia, you have an international passport and you have an internal passport. You give your documents, they see you on the voter rolls, there you are. Then they give you the ballots, could be a number of things, municipal, city, federal, maybe your district, and you get all these documents and you go into a booth and then you come out and you put them in the separate boxes. That's it, okay? You're on the voter roll, okay? Very simple, it's very transparent. In a lot of countries that have had a history of a weak democracy, and I actually kind of like the idea, you have to put your thumb in the ink, like I voted, okay? You can't vote twice, you can't have 2 thumbs, you only get 1, okay? Which, it washes off after a day. And, it gives people confidence that the vote is on the up and up. But everything this bill, HR 1, is doing is diluting everything.
Well,
there seems to be almost who's responsible ultimately.
I think exactly. And again, you've got this thing called mail-in voting. Now, mail-in voting has been banned in many countries precisely because it is so rife with fraud. And particularly what happened in November, that the various restrictions that were put in place, like you have to have a signature ID, you have to actually specifically request a ballot. They didn't just automatically send it out. You had to have a signature on an envelope. It had to be notarized. All of these things that were put in were just simply boom, dropped in November.
Well,
There's none of that in this piece of legislation.
One of the reasons why we had mail-in voting, because the United States is kind of anomalous in the world because they have so many foreign troops in other countries, okay? And so for troops to be able to, but there's a custodian issue there. I mean, you know where it's going. I mean, it's, I guess from the base to, some kind of command to an electoral station in the United States. I mean, there's a chain of command that is, it doesn't break. You have a knowledge of all of the chain, okay? Mail-in, no, you really don't. I mean, also the exception was elderly people. Now, presumably, it would be the children that would go with the documents, get the signatures and everything like that, and they would do the legwork. So you're basically keeping mostly that under control. But that's such a before 2020. That was such a tiny percent. Right. In 2020, that was the norm.
Right, but even then would have to be notarized.
Yes,
signatures would have to be notarized. You can't just say, "Well, this is my granny. I took her vote. Oh, that's fine." I mean, that you just couldn't do that.
Well, it is now.
Right. No,
well, if it passes.
If it passes, but that's the interesting thing is that if you read the media coverage, the suggestion is that the only people who are opposed to this are Republicans who have embraced Donald Trump's view, that the false view, I should say false, because you cannot say Donald Trump's false, lying view that there was election fraud. Every media report. Therefore, the only people who object to this are people who subscribe to Trump's fakery. Well, I mean, it is an absurdity. One only looks back a few years ago, for instance, in the 2012 election, when the New York Times was very concerned about mail-in voting because they thought that it would work to the advantage of the Republicans, because the Republicans would do the granny trolling. They would go to all these elderly places because the elderly people were thought to vote for the Republicans. They didn't like Obama, and they were afraid that that's how the Republicans might win in 2012. At that time, the New York Times was running articles condemning mail-in voting. This is undemocratic.
There was the Carter-Baker Commission.
The Carter-Baker Commission, exactly, which also attacked mail-in voting because it's so rife with fraud. It was always been the commonsensical view, which is that in anything that as you said, leaves out custodial issues, that you don't actually have a person directly present and showing personal ID. Such a thing is rife for fraud. Yes, go ahead.
Well, one of the broader issue of all of this that's it's very damaging, because you keep hearing these phrases, "our democracy." It's something that they say all the time. But if you unpack what they mean by that, it doesn't mean we collectively make up a democracy. No, their definition is our democracy, meaning you agree with our definition of democracy. And if you don't, then you can't be part of our democracy because you're treasonous or insurrectionist. I mean, look at how they use that language, because they want you to believe they're inclusionary, but they're exclusionary, okay? Because you must agree with us, you must agree with HR 1, or you're against democracy. No, that's a simpleton's argument, and this is what these people are. Authoritarians usually are simpletons, okay?
Right.
Because they don't like debate, because they don't like to participate in it, because they usually lose.
No, that's exactly right. And so again, the media, which often act as an echo chamber for the Democrats, keep using this word voter suppression, voter suppression. Republicans will support voter suppression. And then when you ask, well, how are they suppressing votes? Well, apparently asking for a voter ID is a suppression of the vote. Apparently restricting mail-in ballots is a suppression of the vote. Apparently saying you have to show up on election day, and that generally, which is You've always had it throughout history.
Election.
Election day, you don't just sort of come in whenever you feel like it and decide to vote. That also is voter suppression.
So having election laws is voter suppression.
Exactly.
Okay.
That's it.
Okay.
That's what it comes to. That's what it comes to.
This is a disaster because what it wants, they want to codify all of the mistakes and misunderstandings and blurriness. I'm being very charitable here of November 2020. It's only going to divide the country even more, It's for me, again, we've talked about this quite a bit since the election, and particularly since the inauguration of Joe Biden, is that they're going to ram things down everyone's throat at warp speed because they don't want to see what people are doing. Do you know, for this ridiculous stimulus package, which has only 9% of it has to do with COVID, that was voted on at 2:00 in the morning Saturday. In a capital that's surrounded by barbed wire, troops, and in the quietness of darkness. I mean, this is so, they're so opaque. Okay. I mean, it's just like when Nancy Pelosi said about what was it? I think it was about Obamacare. What's in the bill? I don't know. Well, after we vote for it, you can read it. I'm paraphrasing, of course.
Something like that. She did something like, a piece of legislation, which could be 5,000 pages long. No one in the world can possibly get through that. And particularly if it's been submitted and you've got about 2 hours before the vote. And
that's how they voted.
There's a restriction on who can see it and for how long. I mean, it's not like everyone gets distributed the piece of legislation. You have to go to a special room and inspect it for yourself and then go vote for it.
Ron Paul said exactly the same thing about the Patriot Act. He said no one has read it, but they voted for it.
That's right. That's it. Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's kind of interesting. And again, even the media report that now no less than 43 states are trying to address what happened in November. And I think that the Brennan Center's said there are 250 legislative bills that had been proposed in these 43 states to amend some of the shenanigans that took place in November. So you can see that the actual people who actually face the voters know that something very badly went wrong in November. That's why they're putting forward these bills, because as you said, we can't go through this again. And so, but it's apparently these people in Congress who obviously they want to avert these changes, because once these changes in these states take place, it's going to be very hard to pull off what they did in November. So HR 1 is kind of an attempt to thwart what the individual states are doing.
HR 1 also could be interpreted, if passed, have you ever, so your eligibility, it's no longer a right, it will be an eligibility issue. Have you ever attended a Trump rally? Do you know anyone that has? Do you have a friend of a friend of a friend that, oh, really? Okay. This is the spookiest thing of our lifetime, George.
Right.
This is the spookiest thing in my lifetime, is that now they're profiling individuals if they are worthy of the ballot. It's coming right now.
I agree. I agree. All right. Well, we will see what happens. Of course, we will maintain our laser-like focus on Nancy Pelosi and her doings. And remember, we are now on Rumble. Please look us up on Rumble. We will be back here. And remember, if you like the gaggle, please like, share, and subscribe. See you soon. Bye.